man who chain-smoked Salems and drank frozen daiquiris in gulps. "Hey, bartender," Mrs. Riley called. "Get a rag. One of the customers just spilled a drink." "That's quite all right, darling," the young man said angrily. He arched an eyebrow at Ignatius and his mother. "I think I'm in the wrong bar anyway. I really must run." The young man sighed. "Thanks anyway. By the way, where did you ever get that hat? It's truly fantastic." "Oh, Lord, I had this since Ignatius made his first communion." "Would you consider selling it? I'll give you $10 for it." "Come on, for this? 15? Really?" Mrs. Riley removed the hat. "Sure, honey." The young man opened his wallet and gave Mrs. Riley 3 $5 bills. Draining his daiquiri glass, he stood up and said, "Now I really must run." "Ignatius, we gotta go now," Mrs. Riley said. "I'm hungry." She turned toward him and knocked her beer bottle to the floor where it broke into a spray of brown, jagged glass. "Mother, are you making a scene?" Ignatius asked irritably. "What's going on here?" a woman asked from the padded chartreuse leatherette door of the bar. She was a statuesque woman nearing middle age, her fine body covered with a black leather overcoat that glistened with mist. "I'll leave this place for a few hours to go shopping, and look what happens. I gotta be here every minute to watch out you people don't ruin my investment." "Just two drunks," the bartender said. "I've been giving them the cold shoulder since they come in, but they've been sticking like flies." "I beg your pardon," Ignatius said. "It's just my luck to have this crap broken all over here just when I'm looking for a janitor." The woman looked at the bartender. "Get these two out." "Oh, yes, Miss Lee." "Don't you worry," Mrs. Riley said. "We're leaving." "We certainly are," Ignatius added, lumbering toward the door, leaving his mother behind to climb off her stool. "Hurry along, Mother. This woman looks like a Nazi commandant. She may strike us." Mrs. Riley paid with 2 of the bills the young man had given her, and as she swayed past Miss Lee, she said, "We know when we not wanted. We can take our trade elsewheres." Outside, Mrs. Riley took her son's arm for support, but as much as they tried, they moved forward very slowly, though they seemed to move sideward more easily. They continued along the wet flagstones of Bourbon Street. On St. Anne, they found the old Plymouth easily. Its high roof stood above all the other cars. Mrs. Riley climbed the curb twice, trying to force the car out of the parking place, and left the impression of a 1946 Plymouth bumper in the hood of the Volkswagen in the rear. Suddenly, the car leaped out of the parking spot and skidded across the wet street into a post supporting a wrought iron balcony. The post fell away to one side, and the Plymouth crunched against the building. "Oh, my God!" Ignatius screamed from the rear. "If I were driving, I would put the auto in reverse and back gracefully away from the scene. Someone will certainly press charges. The people who own this wreck of a building have been waiting for an opportunity like this for years. They probably spread grease on the street after nightfall, hoping that motorists like you will spin toward their hovel." He belched. "Oh, my digestion has been destroyed. I think that I am beginning to bloat." Mrs. Riley shifted the worn gears an inch slowly backward. As the car moved, the splintering of wood abounded over their heads, a splintering that changed into splitting of boards and scraping of metal. Then the balcony was falling in large sections, thundering on the roof of the car with the dull, heavy thud of grenades. The car, like a stoned human, stopped moving, and a piece of wrought iron decoration shattered a rear window. "Honey, you okay?" Ignatius made a gagging sound. The blue and yellow eyes were watering. "Say something, Ignatius," his mother pleaded, turning round just in time to see Ignatius stick his head out of a window and vomit down the side of the dented car. Patrolman Mancuso was walking slowly down Shart Street dressed in ballet tights and a yellow sweater, a costume which the sergeant said would enable him to bring in genuine, bona fide suspicious characters instead of grandfathers and boys waiting for their mothers. The costume was the sergeant's punishment. He had told Mancuso that from now on he would be strictly responsible for bringing in suspicious characters. That police headquarters had a costume wardrobe that would permit Mancuso to be a new character every day. In the 2 hours that he had been cruising the French Quarter, he had captured no one. Twice things had looked hopeful. He had stopped a man wearing a beret and asked for a cigarette, but the man had threatened to have him arrested. Then he accosted a young man in a trench coat who was wearing a lady's hat, but the young man had slapped him across the face and dashed away. Patrolman Mancuso heard what seemed to be an explosion. Hoping that a suspicious character had just thrown a bomb or shot himself, he ran around the corner onto St. Anne and saw the green hunting cap emitting vomit among the ruins. Ignatius pulled his flannel nightshirt up and looked at his bloated stomach. He often bloated while lying in bed in the morning, contemplating the unfortunate turn that events had taken since the Reformation. Since the arrest and the accident, he had been bloating for almost no reason at all, his pyloric valve snapping shut indiscriminately and filling his stomach with trapped gas which had character in being and resented its confinement. Was the ludicrous attempt to arrest him the beginning of a bad cycle? The accident was also a bad sign. Ignatius's valve closed again, and he rolled over on his left side to press the valve open. "How come about that porter job you got advertised in the paper?" "Yeah." Lana Lee looked at the sunglasses. "You got any references?" "A police give me a reference. He tell me I better get my ass gainfully employed," Jones said, and shot a jet of smoke out into the empty bar. "You got any experience as a porter?" "Hell, anybody can do that, especially colored peoples." "Well, I've been looking," Lana Lee said, "for the right boy for this job for several days." She put her hands in the pockets of her leather overcoat and looked into the sunglasses. This was really a deal, like a present left on her doorstep. A colored guy who would get arrested for vagrancy if he didn't work. She would have a captive porter whom she could work for almost nothing. It was beautiful. Lana felt good for the first time since she had come upon those two characters messing up her bar. "The pay is $20 a week." "Hey, no wonder the right man ain't shown up. Woo-wee! Say, whatever happened to the minimum wage? You need a job, right? I need a porter. Business stinks, take it from there. Last person working in here must have starved to death. You work 6 days a week from 10 to 3. If you come in regular, who knows? You might get a little raise. Patrolman Mancuso enjoyed riding the motorcycle. At the precinct, he had borrowed a large and loud one that was all chromium and baby blue. And at the touch of a switch, it could become a pinball machine of lashing, winking, blinking red and white lights. The forces of evil generated by the hideous and apparently impossible to uncover underground of suspicious characters seemed remote to him this afternoon. Although the days had lately been cold and damp, the afternoon had that sudden, surprising warmth that makes New Orleans winters gentle. Patrolman Mancuso appreciated the mildness, for he was wearing only a T-shirt and Bermuda shorts, the sergeant's costume selection for the day. The long red beard that hooked over his ears by means of wires did manage to warm his chest a little. He had snatched the beard from the locker while the sergeant wasn't looking. On his own time, he was going up to see that poor widow Riley. She looked so pitiful, crying in the middle of that wreck. The least he could do was try to help her. The address that Patrolman Mancuso was looking for was the tiniest structure on the block, aside from the carports. The 1946 Plymouth was parked in the front yard. The tiny yard was completely bare. There were no shrubs, there was no grass, and no birds sang. A woman screamed through the shutters of the house next door, "Miss Riley's probably in the kitchen. Go round back." Patrolman Mancuso thanked the woman's voice and walked into the dank alley. "Oh, it's you," Mrs. Riley said. "How you doing, Mr. Mancuso? Come on in the house and we'll have us a nice cup of coffee." The kitchen was a large, high-ceilinged room, the largest in the house, and it smelled of coffee and old newspapers. Like every room in the house, it was dark. The greasy wallpaper and brown wooden moldings would have transformed any light into gloom, and from the alley, very little light filtered in. "Now, tell me what that man said. How much I gotta pay?" "I spoke with the man this morning," Patrolman Mancuso said. "He got a contractor to appraise the damage." Mrs. Riley took the sheet of paper and read the typed column of itemized figures beneath the contractor's letterhead. "Lord, $1,020? This is terrible. How am I going to pay that?" She dropped the estimate on the oilcloth. "You sure that is right?" Ignatius strolled into the kitchen in his nightshirt. Then he noticed the guest and said coldly, "Ugh." "Ignatius, you know Mr. Mancuso. Say hello." "I do believe that I've seen him about," Ignatius said, and looked out the back door. Patrolman Mancuso was too startled by the monstrous flannel nightshirt to reply to Ignatius's pleasantry. "Ignatius, honey, the man wanted over $1,000 for what I did to his building." $1,000? He will not get a cent. We shall have him prosecuted immediately. Contact our attorneys, Mother." "Our attorneys? He got an estimate from a contractor. Mr. Mancuso here says there's nothing I can do." "Oh, well, we shall have to pay him then." "I made up my mind. Tomorrow we looking at the want ads in the paper. You gonna dress up and go find you a job." "Do I believe what I'm hearing?" Ignatius asked. "I doubt very seriously whether anyone will hire me." "You can get a good job. Wait till they see a boy with a master's degree." Ignatius staggered up the brick path to the house, climbed the steps painfully, and rang the bell. Ignatius, baby, Mrs. Riley cried when she opened the door. What's wrong? You look like you're dying. My valve closed on the streetcar. Lord, come in quick out of the cold. Ignatius shuffled miserably back to the kitchen and fell into a chair. The personnel manager at that insurance company treated me very insultingly. You didn't get the job? Of course I didn't get the job. Did you go to the other places? Obviously not. Do I appear to be in a condition that would attract prospective employers? I had the good judgment to come home as soon as possible. Lord, babe, you gotta look up. Look up! Ignatius repeated savagely. I refuse to look up. Optimism nauseates me. It's perverse. Ignatius, get a hold of yourself. Let us look in the afternoon's paper. Maybe they got a nice job in there. Here, listen to this. I've been seeing this ad in the paper every day, Mrs. Riley said, holding the newspaper very close to her eyes. Clean, hard worker man, quiet type. Give that to me, Ignatius said, snatching the paper from his mother. Clerical work, 25, 35 years old. Apply Levy pants. Ignatius yawned, exhibiting the flabby pink of his tongue. Levy pants sounds just as bad, if not worse, than the titles of the other organizations I have contacted. I can see that I'm obviously beginning to scrape the bottom of the job market already. Just you wait, babe. You'll make good. Patrolman Mancuso had a good idea that had been given to him by, of all people, Ignatius Riley. He had telephoned the Riley's house to ask Mrs. Riley when she could go bowling with him and his aunt. But Ignatius had answered the telephone and screamed, "Stop molesting us, you mongoloid! If you had any sense, you would be investigating dens like that Night of Joy bar in which my beloved mother and I were mistreated and robbed. In addition, the proprietress, Lana Lee, is a Nazi. We barely escaped with our lives. Go investigate that gang and let us alone, you homewrecker." The sergeant would be glad to know about the place. He might even compliment Patrolman Mancuso for getting the tip. Mr. Gonzalez turned the lights on in the small office and lit the gas heater beside his desk. In the 20 years that he had been working for Levy Pants, he had always been the first person to arrive each morning. The criteria at Levy Pants were very low. Promptness was sufficient excuse for promotion. Mr. Gonzalez became the office manager and took control of the few dispirited clerks under him. He could never really remember the names of his clerks and typists. They seemed at times to come and go almost daily, with the exception of Miss Trixie, the octogenarian assistant accountant, who had been copying figures inaccurately into the Levy ledgers for almost half a century. She even wore her green celluloid visor on her way to and from work, a gesture that Mr. Gonzalez interpreted as a symbol of loyalty to Levy Pants. Mr. Gonzalez was about to search Miss Trixie's area for his missing stamp pad when the door of the office opened and she shuffled in, scuffing her sneakers across the wooden floor. "Good morning, Miss Trixie," Mr. Gonzalez called in his effervescent tenor. "And how are we this morning?" "Who? Oh, hello, Gomez," Miss Trixie said feebly, and drifted off toward the ladies' room. Mr. Gonzalez took the opportunity of her disappearance to retrieve his stamp pad. Then the door opened, and one of the largest men that Mr. Gonzalez had ever seen entered the office. He removed the green cap and revealed thick black hair plastered to his skull with Vaseline in the style of the 1920s. When the overcoat came off, Mr. Gonzalez saw rings of fat squeezed into a tight white shirt that was vertically divided by a wide flowered tie. It appeared that Vaseline had also been applied to the mustache, for it gleamed very brightly. Mr. Gonzalez prayed almost audibly that this behemoth was an applicant for a job. He was impressed and overwhelmed. Ignatius found himself in perhaps the most disreputable office that he had ever entered. The naked light bulbs that hung irregularly from the strained ceiling cast a weak yellow light upon the warped floorboards. Old filing cabinets divided the room into several small cubicles, in each of which was a desk, painted with a peculiar orange varnish. A very old woman hobbled into the room and bumped into a row of filing cabinets. The atmosphere of the place reminded Ignatius of his own room, and his valve agreed by opening joyfully. Ignatius prayed almost audibly that he would be accepted for the job. He was impressed and overwhelmed. "I have come in response to your advertisement." "Oh, wonderful. Which one?" the man cried enthusiastically. "We're running two in the paper, one for a woman and one for a man." "Which one do you think I'm answering?" Ignatius hollered. "Oh," Mr. Gonzalez said in great confusion, "I'm very sorry. I wasn't thinking. I mean, the sex doesn't matter. You could handle either job. I mean, I'm not concerned with sex." "Please forget it," Ignatius said. He noticed with interest that the old woman was beginning to nod at her desk. Working conditions looked wonderful. "Come, sit down, please. Miss Tracy will take your coat and hat and put them in the employee's locker. We want you to feel at home at Levy Pence." "But I haven't even spoken with you yet." "That's all right. I'm sure that we'll see eye to eye. Miss Tracy, this is one of our new workers." "Fine big boy," Miss Trixie said, turning her roomy eyes up toward Ignatius. "Well fed." Miss Trixie worked for Mr. Levy's late father, a fine old gentleman. "Yes, a fine old gentleman," Miss Trixie said, unable to remember the elder Mr. Levy at all anymore. "Miss Tracy has stood by Levy Pence through the years," the office manager explained. "Can you begin work today?" Mr. Gonzalez asked Ignatius. I don't believe that we've discussed anything concerning salary and so forth." "Isn't that the normal procedure at this time?" Ignatius asked condescendingly. "Well, the filing job pays $60 a week." "That is certainly far below the wage that I had expected." Ignatius sounded abnormally important. "I have a valve which is subject to vicissitudes which may force me to lie abed on certain days." But listen," the office manager said confidentially. "Miss Tracy here earns only $40 a week, and she does have some seniority." "She does look rather worn," Ignatius said. "Isn't she past retirement?" "Shh," Mr. Gonzalez hissed. "Mrs. Levy won't let us retire her. She thinks it's better for Miss Tracy to keep active. Mrs. Levy is a brilliant, educated woman. She's taken a correspondence course in psychology." "I hate to disappoint you, sir, but I am afraid that the salary is not adequate. An oil magnate is currently dangling thousands before me, trying to tempt me to be his personal secretary." We'll include 20 cents a day for car fare, Mr. Gonzalez pleaded. Well, that does change things, Ignatius conceded. I shall take the job temporarily. Take those glasses off, Jones. How the hell can you see all that crap on the floor? The glasses staying on. Jones bumped the push broom into a bar stool. For $20 a week, you ain't running a plantation in here. Lana Lee started snapping a rubber band around a pile of bills and making little piles of nickels that she was taking out of the cash register. Stop knocking that broom against the bar, she screamed. God damn it to hell, you making me nervous. You want quiet sweeping, you get you a old lady. The broom bumped against the bar several more times. Then a cloud of smoke, and the broom moved off across the floor. You better be glad I'm giving you a chance, boy, Lana Lee said. There's plenty colored boys looking for work these days. The padded door banged open, and a young man clicked into the bar, scraping the metal taps on his flamenco boots across the floor. Well, it's about time, Lana said to him. The boy opened a flashy hand-tooled wallet and gave Lana a number of bills. Everything went okay, George? She asked him. The orphans liked them? They liked the one on the desk with the glasses on. They thought it was some kind of teacher or something. You think they want another like that? Lana asked with interest. Yeah, why not? Maybe one with a blackboard and a book. George winked at her and banged out of the door. That's supposed to be a messenger for the orphans? Jones asked. I like to see the orphans he operating for. I bet the United Fund don't know about them orphans.